All right, so we are back, and I have a take that's never going to happen, but is probably what should happen at this moment. Jon Jones should, but won't, vacate the heavyweight championship of the UFC. Why? The breakdown. Let's go. All right, so if you guys haven't been around for the last couple of days, Jon Jones is getting bullied on Twitter for essentially taking subtweet shots at the interim UFC heavyweight champion, who Jon Jones won't be fighting after he recovers from 2 surgeries. Instead, he'll be fighting a man that's been out of the UFC for 3 years and lost his last fight, Stipe Miocic, for legacy. Now, if you're saying to yourself, that doesn't make a lot of sense, welcome to the fucking club, because none of us actually think it does make sense. It's just the UFC and Jon Jones that want to make a lot of money, to be fair, in pay-per-view revenue, and Jon thinks in some way this helps his legacy more than beating the interim champion because of Stipe's prior fights and not what he is today. That's the definition of winning a paper championship or having a paper title defense versus a 41-year-old man who hasn't fought in forever, instead of defending against the up-and-coming young interim title winner. And Jon, yeah, is a little older, coming off some injuries, but to act like it's fair to Tom Aspinall that any of this is happening is just not true. But Jon was on Twitter as of 2 days ago, starting out with the subtweet, as Jon Jones is known to do, and he said, "Only 4 recognizable opponents, and already the King of England. Must be nice. There will be legendary tales told about you and your infamous call-outs." Now, he's talking about Tom Aspinall calling out Jon Jones to a fight, which is what Tom Aspinall is supposed to do. He is the interim heavyweight champion. He beat Pavlovich by first-round KO to get said interim heavyweight championship. And the natural progression of things from interim to unified is facing the man with the belt, who is Jon Jones. He should vacate, like I said, but he won't. Jon Jones comparing legacies with Tom Aspinall because of when Tom Aspinall won his championship and when Jon Jones won his makes no sense in this regard. No one's questioning that Jon Jones has an impeccable resume and his light heavyweight run was the greatest and could have been by even more so of all time. He won the belt when he was, what, 23 years old? That's something that can't be replicated, but it also has no place in this argument. Tom Aspinall is calling out Jon Jones because that's the next fight for him. And funny enough, he's also calling out Stipe. He's calling out either guy. One of them's holding the belt, one isn't. Someone to fight him and be able to ascend to that heavyweight champion, undisputed and unified. And that doesn't seem like a crazy call out to me. In fact, it seems like that's what he should be doing. That doesn't mean that Jon's resume isn't better than Tom Aspinall's. We all know that at this point. But Jon doesn't see it that way. He doesn't see it as this is Tom's opportunity to win the belt, because apparently to Jon, it doesn't work that way. He said, I mean, it doesn't really work like that. I was a champion when I was 23 years old. You can't show up at age 30 pretending like you've been chasing me your whole life. I have no clue who 90% of his resume is, and Jon took the time to add the little accent markers for resume. That's well done. Meanwhile, I've been highlighting UFC events my entire career. I don't even understand what this means. Tom Aspinall didn't just show up at 30. He has gotten the belt at 30 years old, and yes, Jon did at 23, but Tom isn't acting like Jon has been the person he's chased from light heavyweight to heavyweight. Tom has a goal to be the heavyweight champion of the world. Jon holds that belt. Of course, he's going to call out Jon because that's the next fight for him. Of course he's going to chase Jon now. You came up to heavyweight to chase legacy. Fair play to Jon. He smoked Ciryl Gane. But Tom Aspinall now has the interim belt. That's the next fight for him. You don't defend the interim belt against somebody looking to come up. You take the interim belt as a, at least in the past, the way it worked in the UFC, a guaranteed shot at the champion. So yes, the literal definition of the interim champion and the place it holds is to face the sitting heavyweight champion to unify the belts. That actually is the definition of how it's supposed to work. And Jon says, I love how a fighter can do an interview about me every week, make silly memes on the internet, and then when I respond, they play the victim role. Well, again, and this is referring to the fact that Tom Aspinall has done interviews on one of my good buddies, True Jordy's show, and talked about fighting Jon Jones. And yeah, there's been some shots even thrown from Tom Aspinall saying that a lot of Jon's defenses were against blown up middleweights, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think Jon's resume speaks for itself. It is top notch. He defended against some of the best while they were good and some of them while they were out of their prime, but still at the top of their division. I don't really get down with that argument as much, and I will always be the one that says that Jon Jones is the greatest MMA fighter I've ever seen. He's the GOAT. Him and DJ, shout out my boy Mighty Mouse, are the 2 GOATs in my opinion. But this response, talking about victim roles and me just responding, it isn't the fact that Jon responded, it's the fact that he's actively just saying no to fighting the interim interim champion. That's the reason everybody is upset about this. And it's the craziest thing because John is talking about legacy. But to fight for legacy would mean taking on the toughest challenges. And right now, Tom Aspinall is the toughest challenge John could take on. If he wants to talk about a retirement fight and to ride off into the sunset with one fight left under his belt, that's fine. Just vacate the heavyweight belt so you can have your Stipe fight as a retirement fight. It can still go on your legacy, but again, John won't do that because his legacy depends on the paper resume of Stipe from his past, not what he is right now, to add on to his already cemented legacy. Which does give credence to the argument of the names list that John beat that may not have necessarily been in their prime. Again, not the argument I'm going to make for his resume before this, but it would absolutely be the argument to make for him beating Stipe. And as you can see, Tom was tweeting about this for a couple of weeks now at least, because it seems like Tom wants to fight. Even if it wasn't John, they were like, fight Alex Bejeda, and he was like, yeah, it's a great idea. Someone asked him again, and then he said he wants to defend his 205 title, which I understand. It wasn't like Tom has just said it's John or no one. He's trying to fight people. It's not really working out, but he wants to have tough matchups in his division. Again, winner of Blades and Almeida sounds good. He's actively trying to move the division forward. And he just beat the scariest guy in Sergey Pavlovich in the division. So when people ask him about John Jones, of course he's going to say, I want John Jones. So he came out with a tweet series of his own. Last time Stipe fought and won, GTA San Andreas had just come out on PS2. That's not true, I don't think. He will fight for the next undisputed heavyweight title ahead of me, who's the interim champ, active and ranked #1 in the world right now. This makes me quite upset. And again, he's not being irrational and being like, Stipe, John. He's just saying, hey, for the way this is supposed to work in a competitive sport, I should be next. And he should be. Here's another tweet. I'm just trying to be the best and fight the best people. I know it's hard for a lot of people to get their head around. Don't be so triggered, guys. And if the argument is, oh, we're giving Stipe this fight because of what he's done in the past, I don't like that argument. I've never liked that argument. I've said the same thing with Conor. Him walking into a Khabib fight didn't make a lot of sense to me. Was it fun? Yeah. Did it make a lot of sense for their division after a 2-year layoff from Conor? Hell no. These type of things don't make a lot of sense, and there really isn't any precedent for them other than Conor McGregor getting that shot. So I just don't understand why the argument is Stipe should get it based off his legacy before he lost to the guy that's no longer with the company and took 3 years off. No offense to Stipe at all. He's one of the greatest, if not the greatest heavyweight to ever walk this planet, but that was before, and he hasn't fought in 3 years. So why are we rewarding that? And sure, you can play the game of, well, if we never get that fight, we'll never know, but that's kind of how life works. If you don't get those matchups in their prime, then that's just how it goes. We never got Tony Ferguson and Khabib based on factors that were out of their control. Maybe a lot like this, but the division still moved on. Khabib still created his legacy. Tony had his ups and his downs, but again, it's a sport. It's a competitive sport. You have to keep things moving. And Stipe did respond to Tom Aspinall when he was saying a lot of this stuff. He said, I have never caused a delay in the John fight. Tom, once I get this win, let's talk to unify the belt. Again, I don't really blame Stipe here. Stipe's not the one that's got the belt and calling the shots here with the UFC. If it was, and he was in John's position saying the same thing, I'd say it about Stipe. But he wants a shot at the heavyweight title too, so fair play to him. I'm not going to sit here and blame the guy for getting a fight that he wants. This is more on the UFC and John Jones, who can't seem to understand that if this is a competitive sport, you give it to the white-hot hand, and that is Tom Aspinall, who can potentially break out and become a superstar here. Still young, got all of the UK behind him, be the first ever UFC heavyweight champion from the UK, so it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But again, I'm not going to sit here and blame Stipe for talking his shit and trying to get a fight to cement his legacy before it's all said. And then Tom responded to a lot of the things that John was saying about the 90% of his resume is a bunch of no-names to John and how he had the belt at 23 and Tom didn't get it till he was 30. And Tom said to John, you're letting your ego run wild here, mate. I'm not downplaying your resume. It's incredible, far superior to mine. You are known as the best fighter ever, and that's exactly why I want to beat you. Surely you can understand. Again, very simple and a respectable response, but it shouldn't even have to be said. Like, this is simple shit. He's the interim champ. He wants the belt. He deserves a shot at the belt because that's what the interim champ gets for winning the interim championship. I sound like a broken record, man. And then John was responding to fans and said, it gets old, doesn't it, champ? He goes, literally the same thing, different year. It's always the fighter who's not technically next in line who talks the most shit. Usually crickets from the guy who is actually next with the contract signed. Why do we even have the interim belts? Get rid of the interim belts, dude. Get rid of them. Because if Tom Aspinall is not technically next in line, holding the #1 ranking in the world and the interim title, then the rankings don't matter. None of it matters. To be fair, in certain instances, it hasn't mattered for a while. Get rid of the shit and let's just make this thing. How many fights can we make that people want to watch, regardless of rankings and other things like that? We'll just give Conor McGregor a shot at the middleweight belt, the 170 belt, the 155 belt. We should have just let Izzy rematch Sean Strickland right away. Sean O'Malley will now be fighting third graders at 135 pounds. Because none of it makes sense anyway, so yeah, there you go. So John then, we're going through all of these, I don't care, responded once again and said to a fan who said, "Are you afraid of Pavlovich? You know what the Russians are capable of in this damn sport?" He said, "Yep, I'm terrified. No matter who would have won that interim championship, the narrative would still be the same. The GOAT is getting older now and is running from fights. 36-year-old lifelong champion starting to contemplate retirement. What a chicken." I don't know who would have said that had you not said the things you said about Tom Aspinall and tried to justify not fighting him because his resume isn't yours, because he only got the belt when he was 30, and because he's not technically next in line, so he's talking shit, even though that's what the whole interim belt's supposed to be about. John once again came with another tweet today. He's been on a tweet storm as of this morning. He said, "What I refuse to do is be like a lot of those fighters who stuck around too long. That just won't happen. Your boy Bones Jones over here, despite what a lot of people may think, I've set myself up pretty well in life. I want Stipe for my resume. Outside of that, I need nothing else from this sport. I came, I saw, I conquered. Facts." Again, I get you want to boost the resume. You want to go out with a legacy that no one else can top. And on paper, Stipe's resume is better than Tom Aspinall's, right? Yes. So John winning that fight could say, "I beat Stipe, and Stipe beat all the other heavyweights, including the guy that's no longer here in their first fight. I had this amazing run at 205, technically went undefeated, and then I moved up to heavyweight and beat the best heavyweight of all time." But everyone that has two eyes and was around and will be around to see that fight will say, "Yeah, you beat one of the best heavyweights of all time when he was no longer best heavyweight, not in his prime at all, and hadn't fought for 3+ years, when the other guy that held the interim belt was waiting to fight you, and you just quite frankly chose not to take that fight, even though it's widely regarded as a tougher fight." So John goes on one last time to further explain, and he says, someone asked, "Retiring after the Stipe fight then?" He said, "I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is coming back from 2 different surgeries, which he just got a shoulder or a pec and an elbow surgery, which he'll be back, I think, at the same time regardless. And defeating Stipe is my primary goal. A huge feat if you ask me. We both have already agreed to massive contracts. A win for either one of us would be absolutely massive for either our careers. Despite how good Tom may seem right now, a win over him does nothing for my legacy. That's just the truth. That's all I'm saying. I understand a lot of guys don't fully understand what's happening behind the scenes. You don't make it as far as myself and Stipe not realizing the business side of this." So again, John refers to things that are happening behind the scenes, and then he also talks about his legacy, and then he also talks about paydays. What John wants is, again, a paper championship defense for ridiculous amounts of money that he was probably promised when this fight actually had people excited and they were talking about it about 2 years ago now. And I'm sure that Dana, who's also in on this, because the UFC is not only okay with this, but they're pushing this as the fight they want to see as well. So Dana, I'm sure, has a very big financial incentive to make this fight happen. And to be fair, it probably does do better business on the night than Tom and John. But this is, at the end of the day, a sport. And for John to want a big business fight and want to add another name to his legacy is all fine. But if you want money in the business side and to add to your legacy, I'm just saying, in my opinion, there's a piece of the cake that John shouldn't be able to have and eat it too. Because again, John's legacy at this point, if he's talking about fighting Stipe, I don't even know if it depends on the belt. The only reason that the belt means anything is because John can say he got another defense. But the real legacy fight here would be beating the up-and-coming interim heavyweight champion. Does it look as good on the name resume? Maybe not right now. But what happens if Tom Aspinall goes on a nasty run in the heavyweight division and clears out everybody not named John Jones? That thing looks pretty nice for the next 10 years. But John isn't willing to risk that type of fight based off what Tom Aspinall is right now, not what Tom will be in the future. But he is willing to concede to what Stipe is right now based on the things he did in his past. That's the real difference here. John doesn't want to know about the ghost of Christmas future. He'd rather unwrap his gifts and take the shillings of Stipe Miocic, who is In this scenario, the ghost of Christmas past. That's what I don't like about this. And I'm not even trying to be disrespectful to John or Stipe here. I just think if this is our sport, I just think that the interim championship should mean something. Otherwise, why do we even have them? Like, what's the point in doing that? Because you basically put Tom Aspinall on a shelf, or you give him a fight versus a guy that's not the champion, so that the interim belt didn't mean anything to begin with, and he has to defend a belt that's not even the real belt, waiting for the real belt to be vacated after both John and Stipe fight and probably most likely both retire. And we end up in the same position we're at right now, where Tom or another heavyweight and another heavyweight will be fighting for a vacant belt. It is just a waste of time, a waste of the belt. And honestly, at the end of the day, for me, it won't be as big of a legacy win for John Jones as he thinks. But the simple answer for me is if John Jones wants a retirement fight, vacate the belt. The UFC won't do that. It doesn't really matter, but it's what should happen because he's holding up the heavyweight division. And it's selfish, it's not right, but it's the fight game, I guess, and as long as the UFC is on board, it'll continue to happen. But you guys let me know what you think. Is John holding up the division? Is he ducking Tom Aspinall? Is this whole Stipe Miocic back and forth anything more than just a way for both of them to make a shit ton of money and both retire? I don't have those answers, but when John returns from his injury and Stipe gets out of his rocking chair, guess we'll find out.